Before one of Britain's most famous victories in North Africa, British forces constructed a pipeline with a peculiar requirement. It needed to look unfinished. Elsewhere, real tanks were being given the outlines of lorries. Dummy equipment helped preserve misleading positions. Vehicle areas became part of a deception plan known as Bertram. None of these objects told the whole story by itself. Together, they were designed to create a believable picture of where the 8th Army was preparing to strike and how ready it appeared to be. And hidden inside that picture was real British armour, real tanks, hidden beneath strange structures designed to make them resemble ordinary lorries. So how do you conceal an armoured force in a desert where concentrations of vehicles can reveal your intentions? And how far can you push a deception before the enemy begins to see through it? The answer was larger than one tank, larger than one disguise. Britain was preparing an entire false picture of the battlefield. And the strangest part was that much of what the enemy could observe was real. It simply did not mean what it appeared to mean. Friends, let's get to 1,000 subscribers. We're so close now. Please subscribe, press the hype button, leave a like and a comment as well. Thank you. Now let's continue. Look closely at a Sunshield, and the first reaction may be disbelief. A Crusader tank was a serious fighting vehicle. Tracks, armor, turret, gun. It had a shape that announced exactly what it was. The Sunshield tried to change that shape. A lightweight structure was fitted over the tank so that, from the intended point of observation, the vehicle could resemble a lorry. The tank had not vanished. Nothing magical had happened to its weight, its engine, or its tracks. Its category had changed. That distinction is the key to the entire story. Camouflage usually brings to mind concealment. Paint something to match the ground.
Cover it with netting.
Break up the outline. Keep it in shadow. The Western Desert made large-scale concealment difficult. Natural cover was limited, and the concentration of vehicles required for a major offensive created a problem of its own. An army preparing to attack leaves clues. Vehicles gather, supply areas expand, artillery moves, fuel and ammunition have to be positioned. Armor appears where armor did not appear before. A single tank might be hidden. An armored concentration is a different problem. And in 1942, the 8th Army was preparing for a major offensive at El Alamein. The geography made the question even sharper. To the north lay the Mediterranean. To the south, the Qattara Depression formed a severe obstacle to large military movement. The fighting area between them did not offer unlimited freedom of maneuver. Disposition mattered. Where armor appeared to be concentrating mattered. The apparent direction of preparation mattered. So British deception specialists faced a practical question. If a large force cannot simply disappear, can its visible signs be rearranged into a misleading story? Operation Bertram was built around that broader problem. The Sunshield has become one of its most memorable objects because the image is so strange. A tank dressed as transport, almost theatrical. But Bertram was not a theatrical performance staged for a single observer. It was physical deception organized around the appearance of an army. British camouflage specialists worked to alter the visual evidence that reconnaissance and intelligence could gather before the offensive. That did not mean making every object perfectly convincing at close range. A Sunshield was never meant to turn a tank into a real lorry for a mechanic standing beside it. The disguise had to work in context, and context was where the plan became clever. Imagine an area associated with ordinary military transport. Lorries are common.
Traffic is expected.
Vehicles come and go. Nothing about a lorry by itself announces a concentrated, armored, striking force. Now place a real tank beneath a cover that gives it the broad appearance of that ordinary transport. The observer may still see a vehicle. The question becomes, what kind of vehicle the observer believes has been seen? That is a much more subtle target. The tank was real. The conclusion drawn from it was the target. The British War Office material surviving from the period leaves a remarkably visual record of this work. One archive record on 8th Army deception before the October 1942 offensive includes 51 photographs. Among them is the image that makes the whole concept immediately understandable. A Crusader tank beneath a Sunshield. The photograph matters because it strips away the legend. No magic wand, no supernatural trick. A real vehicle, a real frame, a practical attempt to alter silhouette and apparent identity. Up close, the device can seem crude. That is precisely why judging it from a museum-style close view can be misleading. The camouflage problem was approached from the observer's position. What shape would be presented? What pattern of vehicles would appear in an area? What would repeated observation suggest about British preparations? The Sunshield changed the outline. The next step changed the wider picture. Real transport had a role in this deception. Areas associated with lorries could establish a familiar visual pattern before armour moved into position. Then, as the British prepared their real concentration, tanks could be moved into areas whose apparent identity had already been shaped by ordinary traffic. Covered by sunshields, those tanks were intended to resemble transport rather than armour. The armour moved. The picture was meant to remain believable, and that difference matters. A disguise placed randomly in the desert is only an odd object. A disguised tank, placed inside a carefully arranged pattern of transport, has context supporting the disguise. This is where Bertram stops being a story about a funny-looking tank cover. The frame was only useful if the ground around it agreed with the story. Camouflage specialists were working with shapes, positions, and expectations. An intelligence staff does not make an assessment from one isolated silhouette. Reports are combined. Locations are marked. Movements are compared. Patterns begin to suggest intention. British planners were trying to influence that combined picture. The enemy could continue observing. What Bertram attempted was to make observation lead towards a misleading assessment of British preparation. There was another side to the choreography. If real armour moved away from an area where it had previously been expected, simply removing it could create a new clue. An empty space can be informative. Dummy equipment helped preserve false positions. The apparent presence of forces could remain where the real military weight was no longer located. Meanwhile, genuine armour could be masked within areas associated with something less threatening. This is deception by substitution. The battlefield remains visible. Its meaning becomes unstable. One false object can be questioned. A larger pattern is harder to dismiss quickly. And the British did not stop with tanks. Bertram extended into a broader physical deception effort involving dummy equipment, concealment, and misleading signs of preparation. The most wonderfully strange example may be the pipeline. A real offensive requires logistics. Fuel, water, ammunition, and transport do not appear by patriotic enthusiasm. They have to be organized. Preparation has a physical signature. So, British deception work included a dummy pipeline intended to contribute to a false impression of how advanced preparations were. Its apparent progress mattered. The pipeline did not need to perform the normal job of a pipeline. Its progress across the landscape was part of the message. An unfinished-looking pipeline could help suggest that preparation remained incomplete. That is a remarkable inversion. Normally, military engineering tries to finish a job as quickly and efficiently as possible. Here, appearance had strategic value. The pipeline carried no dramatic secret inside it. The progress was the secret. Think about what this means when combined with the Sunshields. In one place, armor could appear to be transport. Elsewhere, dummy equipment could help maintain a false military presence. A pipeline could suggest a timetable that was less advanced than reality. The deception was no longer about hiding an object, it was about staging preparation. And preparation is what an enemy intelligence organization tries to read. Where is the armor? Which area is receiving the greatest effort? How close is the enemy to being ready?
What direction appears more likely?
No single photograph answers those questions. A body of observations might. Bertram was designed to contribute to a false picture of the direction and timing of the coming British offensive. That wording matters. It is tempting to tell the story as though every German observer looked directly at every disguised tank and failed a simple test. The surviving evidence supports a stronger and more interesting conclusion without that exaggeration. Axis intelligence was the target of a wider deception picture. The British were trying to shape assessment at command level. That is different from claiming that every Sunshield fooled every pair of eyes. Military deception does not require universal blindness. It requires enough uncertainty, enough misleading evidence, and enough apparent coherence to affect the picture being assembled. This is also why the title of War Magician can distort the story. Jasper Maskelyne became closely attached to popular accounts of British desert deception. His name is irresistible. A magician in uniform, canvas tanks, false armies, Rommel deceived. It sounds ready-made for cinema. The institutional history is larger. The Middle East Camouflage Organization, associated with Geoffrey Barkas and other specialists, brought together people whose skills did not fit the conventional image of battlefield power. Camouflage officers, designers, artists, engineers. People trained to think about how objects appeared from a distance and how landscapes could be read. The famous magician became part of the mythology. Bertram was the work of an organized deception effort. That difference does not make the story less exciting. It makes it more British, in a rather particular wartime sense. The answer to a military problem was not a single heroic genius standing in a tent. It was a group of specialists treating appearance as a practical battlefield resource. Paint,
Frames.
canvas, dummy structures, vehicle movement, timing. Nothing there sounds powerful beside artillery or armor. Placed inside a coherent plan, those ordinary materials could support a false picture of military intention. Then came October 23, 1942. The offensive at El Alamein opened. Once the battle began, the role of camouflage changed instantly. Artillery, infantry, armor, and air power moved the story into open combat. The 8th Army that fought there was a broad force, including formations and personnel from Britain, the Commonwealth, and Empire, alongside Allied support. Any honest telling of El Alamein has to keep that scale in view. The battle was not won by a canvas frame, it was not won by a dummy pipeline, and it was certainly not won by one magician. The fighting depended on men, material, logistics, artillery, armor, air support, command decisions, and the ability to continue through a difficult battle. American-supplied Sherman tanks were also part of the wider material picture available to the 8th Army. British wartime discussion after the victory itself emphasized the contribution of the Army, the Royal Navy, and the Royal Air Force within the wider Allied effort. Bertram belongs inside that larger reality. Its purpose was to help conceal British intentions before the battle. Deception contributed to preparation. It did not fight the battle in place of the soldiers who had to do it. This distinction matters because wartime stories often become smaller as they become more famous. A complex operation turns into one trick. A large organization turns into one colorful personality. A battle fought by many formations becomes one dramatic anecdote. The Sunshield deserves better than that. Its real importance appears when we return to the original problem. How do you hide armor in a landscape where a concentration of armor can reveal what you are preparing to do? The British answer was not to demand perfect invisibility. They tried to alter classification. Tank becomes lorry. Threat becomes transport. Armored concentration becomes ordinary traffic. At least in the picture, the deception was designed to create. That is an extraordinary idea because it attacks one of the most basic habits of intelligence work. See, identify, classify, place on the map, draw a conclusion. Bertram could not stop the first step. The desert remained observable. Vehicles still existed. Reconnaissance still mattered. The deception aimed further down the chain. What if the object is seen but identified incorrectly? What if the location is recorded but its purpose misunderstood? What if several accurate observations are assembled into a misleading picture because the visible evidence has been deliberately staged? A report can be factually correct at the smallest level and still contribute to the wrong conclusion. Vehicle observed, position marked, movement noted, all real. The falsehood lies in what the pattern appears to mean. That is the intellectual heart of the Sunshield. It did not ask a tank to disappear, it asked the observer to put the tank in the wrong mental drawer. Lorry. Such an ordinary word. That was its strength. An army contains thousands of objects competing for attention. Some are immediately threatening, others belong to the background machinery of war. A tank changes the meaning of an area. A lorry can disappear into the logic of supply. The Sunshield exploited that difference in apparent military meaning. And once again, the frame alone was not enough. This is why the larger Bertram picture matters. The vehicle area had to make sense. The dummy positions had to support the false disposition. The pipeline had to contribute to a believable timetable. The deception worked as an arrangement of clues. British camouflage specialists were effectively curating what could be seen. Not perfectly, not without risk. Not with any guarantee that every observer would accept every detail. Deception is rarely that clean. But the plan had ambition. It attempted to influence the enemy's understanding of an army before a major offensive by changing the visual story of preparation. There is a quiet boldness in that. Britain was preparing for one of the most important battles of its North African War. Real armor had to be assembled. Real supplies had to move. Real men had to prepare. The physical signs of that effort could not simply be wished away. So the deception specialists used the signs themselves. A vehicle park could carry the wrong implication. A dummy could preserve a position. A tank could borrow the outline of a lorry. An unfinished pipeline could suggest that time was still available. The battlefield became a document written in objects. Bertram tried to edit the document before the enemy read it. There is one more reason the Sunshield image has survived so well in historical memory.
It is funny.
We should admit that. A Crusader tank beneath a lorry-shaped frame looks strange to modern eyes. The idea seems almost too simple for a mechanized war of radios, aircraft, tanks, and mass artillery. That visual absurdity is part of the attraction. Yet simple devices are not automatically simple ideas. The structure itself was only a tool. The real thinking lay in deciding what category the tank should appear to belong to, where that disguise should sit, and how the surrounding pattern could make the false identity more credible. The disguise was crude. The problem it solved was not, and the surviving archive photographs make that easier to appreciate. At the beginning of this story, the Sunshield is just an odd shape over a tank. Look again now. You are no longer looking at canvas. You are looking at a unit of information. One small part of a false battlefield picture created before the October 1942 offensive. The tank is still there. The armor is still real.
The gun has not vanished.
Only the apparent meaning has changed. That is what Britain was trying to manipulate, not sight itself. Interpretation. El Alamein was won by armies. Bertram was one part of the preparation behind that battle, and its importance should be kept in proportion. Yet proportion does not make the idea less impressive. British deception specialists recognized that the enemy could be shown something genuine and still be encouraged towards the wrong conclusion. A real tank, a real location, a false category. The Sunshield did not make British armor disappear. Its ambition was more subtle, to make real armor belong to the wrong story until the real one began. Which British deception operation should we investigate next? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe to Defiant Britain WW2 for more stories from Britain's war, where the archive is often stranger than the legend.